My name is Nick Brenner, and I used to think I was living the American dream. 41 years old, steady job as an IT systems engineer for a mid-sized company in Cleveland. 2 kids in college, and a wife who still turned heads when she walked into a room. The house was paid off, the cars ran fine, and I had enough money in my 401k to pretend I wasn't going to die at my desk. But here's the thing about dreams. Sometimes you wake up and realize you've been sleepwalking through a nightmare. It started with little things. Marta coming home later and later from her job at Morrison and Associates, the advertising agency downtown where she worked as a creative director. She'd walk through the door at 9, 10, sometimes 11 at night, claiming she was working on some big campaign for a client whose name she could never quite remember when I asked. "You wouldn't understand, Nick," she'd say, not even looking up from her phone as she scrolled through what I assumed were work emails. "It's complicated, creative stuff." Our sex life had flatlined somewhere around the time Ross graduated high school and Amelia started her sophomore year at Ohio State. We were officially empty nesters, which according to every marriage counselor and women's magazine should have meant we were rediscovering each other. Instead, we'd discovered that, without the kids as a buffer, we had about as much chemistry as a wet match. Our bedroom's so cold, I'm thinking of renting it out as a morgue. I told my best friend Curtis one Friday night at Murphy's Bar, our usual spot for drowning the sorrows of middle age. Curtis laughed, nearly choking on his beer. "At least you'd make some money off it. Sandra and I haven't touched each other since Obama was in office. The first time." Curtis worked security at the same office complex where Marta's agency was located. He was one of those guys who noticed everything. Occupational hazard, he called it. He'd been my best friend since high school, back when we both thought we'd be rock stars by 30 and millionaires by 40. Now we were just 2 guys in our 40s wondering where the hell the time went. The first real warning sign came on a Tuesday in October. I was doing laundry, because apparently that was my job now, along with grocery shopping, cooking, and basically everything else that kept our household functioning, when I found a receipt in Marta's jacket pocket, the Ritz-Carlton downtown. Room service for 2. Champagne. The date was 3 days ago, when Marta had supposedly been in meetings until midnight. I stared at that receipt for a long time, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. There could be an explanation. Maybe she was entertaining a client. Maybe it was a business dinner that ran late, and they comped her a room so she wouldn't have to drive home. Maybe I was an idiot. I confronted her that night when she came home at 10:30, claiming she'd been stuck in traffic. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the receipt. She barely glanced at it. "Client dinner, the Morrison account. You know how these things go. Since when do client dinners include hotel rooms?" It ran late. I didn't want to drive home after drinking. She was still looking at her phone, fingers flying over the screen. "God, Nick, do we have to do this now? I'm exhausted." I wanted to push harder, but something in her tone warned me off. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe this was just what happened to marriages after 20 years. You started seeing conspiracies and hotel receipts and late nights at the office. But then I started paying attention. The way she angled her phone away from me when she texted. The new clothes that appeared in her closet. Expensive stuff that I knew damn well wasn't coming out of her salary. The fact that she'd started wearing perfume again, something she hadn't done in years. And the way she looked at me sometimes, when she thought I wasn't watching, like she was seeing a stranger. Or worse, like she was seeing someone she used to love but couldn't quite remember why. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when she was in the shower. Her phone was sitting on the nightstand, and it buzzed with a text message. I told myself I was just glancing to see if it was one of the kids, but the preview on the lock screen made my blood run cold. "Last night was incredible. When can we do it again, Jay?" I sat there staring at that message until the screen went dark, then stared at my own reflection in the black glass. 20 years of marriage, 2 kids, a mortgage, a life we'd built together, brick by brick, year by year. And she was throwing it away for someone whose name started with J. The shower was still running. I could hear Marta singing, actually singing, something she hadn't done in months. She sounded happy, happier than I'd heard her sound in our own house in years. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and went downstairs to make coffee. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate the machine. Curtis found me at Murphy's that afternoon, sitting in our usual booth with 3 empty beer bottles in front of me. "Jesus, Nick, you look like hell," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "What happened?" I told him about the text. about the hotel receipt, about the growing certainty that my wife was having an affair. You need to find out who Jay is, Curtis said. Could be Jake Turnbull. Who? Jake Turnbull. Works at Marta's agency. Creative director, like her. Drives a BMW that costs more than my annual salary. Real smooth operator, if you know what I mean. I did know what he meant. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. The late nights, the new clothes, the way she'd started talking about work like it was the most exciting thing in the world. What do you know about him? Married. Wife's name is Sandra, real ice queen type. Word around the building is that Jake's got a reputation for extracurricular activities. I ordered another beer and tried to process this information. My wife was having an affair with a married man named Jake Turnbull, a man who apparently made a habit of screwing around on his wife. What are you going to do? Curtis asked. That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? What does a middle-aged IT guy do when he discovers his wife is cheating? Confront her? Hire a private investigator? File for divorce and split everything 50-50? Or do something else entirely? Nah, I don't know, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I could feel something shifting inside me. Something cold and calculating that I'd never felt before. Something that scared me a little and excited me a lot. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of watching Marta lie to my face every single day. 3 weeks of pretending I didn't know what I knew, of playing the clueless husband while she snuck around behind my back. I'd started keeping a journal, not because I'm the diary type, but because I wanted to document everything. Every lie, every late night, every time she claimed to be somewhere she wasn't. October 15th. Marta says she's working late on the Morrison account. Curtis texts me at 8 p.m. Her car isn't in the agency parking lot. October 18th. She comes home with a new necklace. Says it was a gift from a grateful client. I've never seen a client give expensive jewelry to their ad exec. But what do I know? October 22nd. She's in the shower again. Phone buzzing. This time the message says, "Can't wait for tomorrow night." The usual place? Jay. I was building a case, piece by piece. Not for a divorce lawyer. I wasn't ready for that yet. I was building a case for something else. Something that would make Jake Turnbull and my cheating wife understand exactly what they'd done to me. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. At 3:17 a.m. on a rainy Thursday morning in November, Marta shook me awake. I came up from sleep slowly, confused and disoriented. Nick, wake up!" She was already dressed, her face pale in the dim light from the hallway. Her hands were shaking. "What's wrong?" I asked, sitting up and checking the clock. "Is it one of the kids?" "No, just get dressed, please. Don't ask questions." There was something in her voice I'd never heard before. Pure terror. "Marta, what the hell is going on?" "Please, Nick, just trust me. Get dressed and come with me, now." I'd been married to this woman for 20 years. I knew her moods, her tells, her ways of manipulating me into doing what she wanted. This wasn't manipulation. This was genuine fear. I got dressed quickly, pulling on jeans and a sweater, while Marta paced by the bedroom door. She kept checking her phone, her face getting paler by the minute. "Are we going to the hospital?" I asked. "Did something happen to your parents? To Victoria?" Victoria was Marta's younger sister, a perpetually single woman in her 30s who seemed to specialize in creating drama wherever she went. She and Marta had always been close. Too close, in my opinion. Victoria had never liked me, and the feeling was mutual. "Just come on," Marta said, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the stairs. We drove through the empty streets of Cleveland in silence. Marta was behind the wheel, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. The rain was coming down hard, turning the streetlights into blurry halos in the darkness. "Nothing says romance like a felony at dawn," I muttered, trying to lighten the mood. Marta didn't laugh. She didn't even seem to hear me. We were heading toward the warehouse district on the east side of town, an area that had been slowly gentrifying but still had plenty of abandoned buildings and empty lots. Not exactly the kind of place you wanted to be at 3:30 in the morning. "Marta, seriously, you're scaring me." "What are we doing?" She pulled into the parking lot of what looked like an old factory. The building was dark except for a few lights on the ground floor. There were several other cars in the lot, cars I recognized. My parents' old Honda Civic, Ross's beat-up Ford pickup, Amelia's red Volkswagen that we'd bought her for her 18th birthday. "Jesus Christ," I breathed. "What the hell is this?" Marta turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the building. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm so sorry, Nick. I tried to stop it. I tried to get out, but he said if I didn't bring you, he'd kill them." "Kill who? Who are we talking about?" But I already knew. The cars in the parking lot told the whole story. Our kids, our parents, probably Victoria too. Someone had taken our entire family hostage, and they'd used my cheating wife to deliver me to them. We walked through the rain to a side door that was propped open with a brick. Inside, the building was mostly empty except for some old machinery and a few folding chairs arranged in a circle under a harsh fluorescent light. In those chairs, tied up and gagged, were the most important people in my life. Ross and Amelia, both crying, both trying to say something through the duct tape over their mouths. My parents, looking older and frailer than I'd ever seen them. Marta's parents, her mother sobbing silently. And Victoria, her eyes wild with terror above the silver tape. Standing behind them, looking like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine, was Jake Turnbull. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, handsome, perfectly groomed even at 3:30 in the morning. He wore an expensive suit and a smile that probably cost more than my car. In his right hand was a gun. "Thanks for bringing him, Marta," Jake said, his voice smooth and cultured, just like we planned. I looked at my wife, understanding flooding through me like ice water. "So this is a team-building exercise, or?" Jake laughed. "I like your sense of humor, Nick. I can see why Marta married you." "Well, one of the reasons." "Let them go," I said, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. "Whatever this is about, it's between us. Leave the family out of it." "Oh, but it is about family," Jake said, walking over to where Ross was tied up. He put the gun against my son's temple, and Ross's eyes went wide with terror. "It's about what you're willing to do for family, how much you're willing to sacrifice. What do you want?" Jake reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila folder. "I want you to sign these papers. Transfer of ownership for your house, your car, your bank accounts, your 401k, your life insurance policies. Everything you own, Nick, everything you've worked for." I stared at the papers, then at the gun pressed against my son's head. "And if I don't, then I start shooting people you love. Starting with Ross here, then moving on to Amelia, then your parents, then Marta's parents. I'll save Victoria for last. She's been very helpful in planning this little gathering." I looked at Victoria, and she looked away. Of course. Marta's bitter, jealous sister had been in on this from the beginning. "You son of a bitch," I said. Now, no need for name-calling. This is just business, Nick. You sign the papers, transfer everything to me, and everyone walks away. You can start over, get a job, rent an apartment. Think of it as an early retirement. And Marta? What's her role in all this?" Jake smiled and put his free hand on Marta's shoulder. She flinched, but didn't pull away. "Marta and I are going to disappear for a while. Maybe Europe, maybe the Caribbean. We haven't decided yet. But don't worry, I'll take good care of her." I looked at my wife, and she was crying now. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted it to go this far. I tried to stop him, but she said you were a pushover," Jake interrupted. "Said you'd never fight back. Said you'd just roll over and take it like you always do." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because Jake had said them, but because I could hear Marta's voice saying them. I could picture her lying in bed with this man, talking about what a weak, pathetic husband she had. "You should see her at the office after hours," Jake continued, clearly enjoying himself. "She likes it risky, the desk, the conference room, even the supply closet once. She's very creative." "Shut up," Marta said, but her voice was barely a whisper. I took the papers from Jake and looked them over. Standard transfer documents, all legal and binding. If I signed these, I'd be left with nothing. 20 years of work, of saving, of building a life, gone. But if I didn't sign them, my family would die. I looked at Ross, at Amelia, at my parents, at the people I'd die for without hesitation. "Give me a pen," I said. Jake's smile widened. "I knew you'd see reason." I signed the papers, one by one, transferring everything I owned to Jake Turnbull. My house, my savings, my retirement, my future. When I was finished, Jake took the papers and looked them over. "Perfect," he said. "You know, Nick, you're taking this much better than I expected. Marta said you'd probably cry." That's when I heard the sirens. They started as a distant wail, then got louder and louder until the sound was overwhelming. Lights flooded the warehouse windows, red and blue and blindingly bright. Jake's smile disappeared. What the hell? The side door exploded inward, and suddenly the warehouse was full of FBI agents in tactical gear, shouting orders and pointing weapons. Drop your weapon. Get on the ground. Now. Jake looked around wildly, the gun still in his hand. For a moment, I thought he might start shooting, might try to take as many of us with him as he could. Instead, he looked at me. You son of a bitch, he said. You knew. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Maybe I should have worn my brown pants, I said. Here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. Eventually, you learn to use it as a weapon. While the FBI agents cuffed Jake and his two associates, who'd been hiding in the shadows like the cowards they were, I watched my family being untied and comforted. Ross was trying to act tough, but I could see his hands shaking. Amelia was crying and holding on to my mother. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night. But they were alive. They were safe. And Jake Turnbull was going to prison. How long have you known? Marta asked me as we stood outside the warehouse, watching Jake get loaded into the back of an FBI van. About the affair? 3 months. About this? I gestured toward the warehouse. 2 weeks. She stared at me. 2 weeks? Victoria's not as smart as she thinks she is. She called the house last Tuesday, when you were supposedly at work. Wanted to know if you'd talked me into it yet. When I pressed her, she hung up. But it got me thinking. The truth was more complicated than that. But I wasn't ready to tell Marta everything. Not yet. I'd known about the affair for months, just like I'd told her. But I'd started suspecting something bigger was going on when I noticed Jake's financial situation didn't match his lifestyle. Curtis had done some digging for me. Turns out Jake was in debt up to his eyeballs. Expensive car payments, a mortgage on a house he couldn't afford, credit cards maxed out. A man like that, having an affair with a woman whose husband had a decent savings account and a paid-off house, well, it didn't take a genius to see where that might lead. So I'd started preparing. First, I'd gone to the FBI, not with accusations. I didn't have proof yet, but I'd expressed concerns about potential extortion and kidnapping. I'd given them Jake's name, Victoria's name, and a detailed account of everything I suspected. Then I'd started setting traps. I'd moved most of our real money into accounts Jake didn't know about. The papers I'd signed tonight were real, but they transferred ownership of assets that were mostly worthless, a house with a secret second mortgage, bank accounts with minimal balances, a 401k that I'd already rolled over into my parents' names, and I'd convinced Marta to help me. That had been the hardest part. When I'd finally confronted her about the affair 2 weeks ago, she'd broken down completely, told me everything, how Jake had seduced her, how he'd gradually isolated her from her friends and family, how he'd started making demands. He said if I didn't help him, he'd tell everyone about us, she'd sobbed. He'd ruin my career, destroy my reputation. And then he started talking about you, about the kids. He said he knew people who could hurt you. It had taken everything I had not to drive straight to Jake's house and beat him to death with my bare hands. Instead, I'd held my wife while she cried and told her we were going to destroy him. Together. You used me, she said now, watching the FBI van disappear into the night. You used me first, I replied. The difference is, I used you to save our family. You used me to help your boyfriend rob us blind. She didn't have an answer for that. The FBI agent in charge, a woman named Sarah Chen, came over to brief us on what happened next. We'll need statements from all of you, she said. And Mr. Brenner, we'll need you to come in tomorrow to go over your evidence in detail. Evidence? Agent Chen smiled. The recordings you made, the financial documents, the communications you intercepted. You've been building quite a case against Mr. Turnbull. Marta looked at me with something that might have been admiration or might have been fear. You recorded everything? Everything, I confirmed. Every conversation with Victoria. Every lie you told me about where you were going. Every time Jake called the house and hung up when I answered. I'd been wearing a wire for the past week with the FBI's help. Every word Jake had said tonight was recorded. His threats, his confessions, his detailed description of the affair, all of it admissible in court. He's going away for a long time, Agent Chen said. Kidnapping, extortion, conspiracy, we're talking 25 to life. As we drove home in separate cars, Marta in her Honda, me in the FBI vehicle that would take me to give my statement, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. But it didn't last long. The next morning, I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee and reading the news coverage of Jake's arrest when someone started pounding on my front door. I opened it to find Sandra Turnbull, Jake's wife, standing on my porch. She was a tall, thin woman, with sharp features and cold eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept. "You son of a bitch," she said, pushing past me into the house. "Good morning to you too, Sandra. Coffee. You destroyed my life. I'm pretty sure your husband did that all by himself." She spun around to face me, her face twisted with rage. "Jake told me everything, how you set him up, how you manipulated that whore wife of yours into betraying him." Interesting perspective. Here I thought Jake was the one who kidnapped my family and tried to steal everything I own. He was desperate. We were about to lose the house, the cars, everything. He needed that money. So he decided to take mine. You have more than you need. A middle-aged nobody with a boring job and a boring life. Jake has vision. He has dreams. He could have done something important with that money. I stared at her, amazed by the sheer audacity of it. "And what about my dreams, Sandra? What about my family's future? Your family will be fine. You'll get other jobs, make other money. But Jake's life is over. 25 years in prison, for what? For trying to better himself? For kidnapping, for extortion, for threatening to murder my children." Sandra's face crumpled, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. "Almost. I won't let you get away with this," she said. "I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are, what you did to my husband. Feel free. I'm sure the newspapers would love to hear your side of the story." She left then, but not before promising that this wasn't over, that she'd make me pay for destroying her marriage, her life, her future. I watched her drive away in Jake's BMW. Apparently the FBI hadn't seized all their assets yet, and felt the first stirring of something dark in my chest. Jake was gone. He'd spend the rest of his life in prison, and good riddance. But Sandra was still out there, and so was Victoria, who'd somehow managed to avoid getting arrested despite her role in the kidnapping plot. And Marta, well, Marta was upstairs in our bedroom, packing her things. She came down an hour later with 2 suitcases and a guilty expression. "I'm going to stay with Victoria for a while," she said, "until we figure out what happens next." "What happens next is we get divorced and you start over." "I know. I need time to think." "About what?" She looked around the kitchen, at the life we'd built together, at the man she'd betrayed. "About how I became someone I don't recognize," she said quietly. After she left, I sat in my empty house and tried to figure out what I was feeling. Relief, sadness, anger, all of the above, probably. But mostly, I felt like I was just getting started. Jake Turnbull had tried to destroy my life and failed. But in the process, he'd awakened something in me that I'd never known existed. Something that didn't believe in forgiveness, something that believed in revenge. The local news picked up the story 3 days later. "Local man foils kidnapping plot," was the headline in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, complete with a photo of Jake being led away in handcuffs. They painted me as the hero, the clever husband who'd outsmarted the criminals and saved his family. If only they knew the whole truth. The truth was, I was just getting started. Sandra Turnbull made good on her threat to destroy my reputation. Within a week of Jake's arrest, stories started appearing on social media. Anonymous posts on neighborhood Facebook groups, comments on news articles, whispers in grocery store checkout lines. Nick Brenner had set up his wife's lover. Nick Brenner had entrapped an innocent man. Nick Brenner was vindictive, calculating, dangerous. Some of it was even true. "You need to let this go," Curtis told me over beers at Murphy's the following Friday. "Jake's in jail, Marta's moved out, and you've got your life back. Don't let Sandra drag you down to her level." Her level? She's defending a man who kidnapped my children. She's a woman whose husband is going to prison for 25 years. People do crazy things when they're desperate. I understood that. What I didn't understand was why everyone expected me to be the bigger person, to turn the other cheek, to forgive and forget. I'd spent 41 years being the nice guy, the pushover, the man who never made waves. And where had it gotten me? A cheating wife, a destroyed marriage, and a family that had nearly been murdered because I was too weak to see the threat coming. Well, I wasn't weak anymore. The first phase of my revenge was simple. I started telling the truth. Not the sanitized version I'd given to the police and the FBI. The whole truth, with all the dirty details that Sandra and Victoria probably thought I'd keep to myself out of embarrassment. I started with Jake's business partner, Frank Morrison. Jake had been embezzling from their agency for months, skimming money from client accounts to fund his lifestyle. I had proof: bank records, forged invoices, altered contracts, all of it perfectly legal evidence that I'd obtained through my own investigation. Frank fired Jake posthumously and sued his estate for damages. The agency went under within a month. Then I went after Victoria. Marta's sister had been the inside woman in Jake's plot, feeding him information about our family, our finances, our routines. She'd helped plan the kidnapping, recruited the muscle, and provided the warehouse location through a contact at her real estate job. But the FBI hadn't been able to prove her involvement beyond a reasonable doubt, so she'd walked away free. I wasn't going to let that stand. Victoria worked for a small real estate company in Lakewood. She was already on thin ice with her boss due to poor sales numbers and customer complaints. It didn't take much to push her over the edge. A few anonymous tips to the Ohio Real Estate Commission about her ethics violations. Some negative reviews on Yelp and Google from clients she'd supposedly screwed over. A carefully orchestrated campaign to destroy her professional reputation. She was fired within 2 weeks. But that wasn't enough. Not for someone who'd helped plan my family's kidnapping. Victoria lived in a small apartment complex that catered to young professionals and recent divorcees. The kind of place where everyone minded their own business and no one asked too many questions. Perfect for what I had in mind. I started small, anonymous noise complaints to the apartment management. Reports of strange smells coming from her unit. Suggestions that she might be running some kind of illegal business out of her home. Then I escalated. Victoria had a weakness for online shopping and expensive wine. She also had terrible internet security habits. The same password for everything, no two-factor authentication, and a tendency to click on links without thinking. It wasn't hard to hack her email and social media accounts, or to use those accounts to make some very embarrassing purchases and posts. The dildo collection that arrived at her office was bad enough. The racist rants that appeared on her Facebook page, posted at 3 a.m., when she'd have been drunk, of course, were what really did the damage. She was evicted from her apartment and ostracized by her social circle within a month. "You're scaring me," Curtis said when I told him about Victoria's downfall. "This isn't like you, Nick. Maybe this is exactly like me. Maybe I just never had a reason to show it before. Or maybe you're becoming someone you don't want to be." I thought about that. Was I becoming someone I didn't want to be? Or was I finally becoming someone I should have been all along? The answer came when Sandra Turnbull showed up at my office. I was working late on a Thursday night, trying to catch up on some server maintenance, when security called to tell me I had a visitor. I figured it was Curtis, stopping by to drag me out for a beer and another lecture about letting go of my anger. Instead, I found Sandra waiting in the lobby, looking like she'd been crying for days. "We need to talk," she said. I almost told security to escort her out, but something in her voice stopped me. 5 minutes, I said. We went up to my office, a small, cluttered space filled with computer equipment and empty coffee cups. Sandra looked around like she'd never seen anything so pathetic. "This is where you work? This is the life Jake was supposed to envy? What do you want, Sandra?" She sat down in the chair across from my desk and stared at me with those cold, dead eyes. "I want you to leave my family alone." "Your family? Jake's in prison, and as far as I know, you don't have any kids. My sister, Victoria." I blinked. "Victoria is your sister?" "Half-sister. Same father, different mothers." She was trying to help me save my marriage. The pieces clicked into place. Victoria hadn't just been helping Jake out of loyalty to Marta. She'd been helping her own sister save her marriage and her lifestyle. "Interesting family dynamic," I said. "Your half-sister helps your husband kidnap my family so you can steal my money and save your house. We were desperate, so you've said. What does that have to do with me?" Sandra leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know what you've been doing to her. The job, the apartment, the other things. You're destroying her life. She helped destroy mine first. She made a mistake. She was trying to help family. She committed multiple felonies. The only reason she's not in jail is because the FBI couldn't prove she was involved. But you know she was involved." "Yes, and you're making her pay for it." "Yes." Sandra nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. "What kind of man are you?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. 6 months ago, I would have said I was a good man, a kind man, a man who believed in forgiveness and second chances. But that man's wife had cheated on him. That man's family had been kidnapped. That man had been betrayed by people he'd trusted. That man was gone. I'm the kind of man who doesn't forget, I said finally. And I don't forgive. Sandra stood up, smoothing down her skirt. Then you and I understand each other perfectly, she said. She left my office, and I went back to work. But I couldn't concentrate. Something about her tone, about the way she'd looked at me in those final moments, set off alarm bells in my head. I called Curtis and asked him to keep an eye on the building's security cameras for the next few days, just in case. In case of what? In case Sandra Turnbull is as vindictive as I am. As it turned out, she was more vindictive, and a lot more dangerous. The attack on my reputation started subtly. A few negative reviews of my work on professional websites, some anonymous complaints to my boss about my attitude and performance, whispers that I was unstable, vindictive, possibly dangerous. Dave Morrison, my supervisor, called me into his office on a Monday morning in December. Nick, we need to talk. Dave was a good guy, former military, straight shooter, the kind of boss who backed his people when they were right and called them out when they were wrong. I'd worked for him for 8 years without a single complaint. What's up? I've been getting some unusual feedback about your work lately, and about you personally. What kind of feedback? Dave pulled out a manila folder and opened it. Anonymous emails claiming you've been hacking into client systems without authorization. Phone calls suggesting you've been using company resources for personal vendettas. And this. He handed me a printed screenshot of a social media post. It was from a local Neighborhood Watch Facebook group, and it showed a photo of me taken outside my house. Dangerous man alert, the post read. This man, Nick Brenner, recently orchestrated an elaborate scheme to destroy his wife's lover and his own sister-in-law. He's vindictive, calculating, and has access to sensitive computer systems. Keep your families safe. The post had been shared 47 times. Dave, this is complete bullshit. Someone's trying to. I know, Dave interrupted. I've worked with you for 8 years, Nick. I know what kind of man you are, but I also know what kind of pressure the company's under right now. We can't afford to have clients questioning our security practices. So what are you saying? I'm saying you need to make this go away, fast, before it gets worse. I took the folder and left Dave's office, my hands shaking with rage. Sandra Turnbull wasn't just coming after me. She was coming after my livelihood, my career, everything I had left. Well, two could play that game. I spent my lunch break in my car, making phone calls and doing research. By